I'd just like to make a short point about this atheist plus movement or atheism plus movement that's going on. Just a couple things that concern me. And sadly, a lot of it comes from the blog post from Greta Christina, who I've always thought was very intelligent and I've enjoyed her videos. And at the risk of upsetting them by sounding like a misogynist, I've also thought she's extremely attractive, so that makes the videos that much more enjoyable. So there it is, I'm a misogynist pig. However, my biggest concern with them is simply the name they choose for their organization. Everybody has a right to form an organization and set rules as to what kinds of people they're going to accept, but I don't want that tied to atheism. We already get enough people saying that we're just another religion or telling us what our quote-unquote atheist beliefs tell us to do, and I don't like giving them more fuel for that fire, because in my estimation, in my mind, this atheism plus is a lot closer to being a religion than it is to being atheism. It includes basically thought crimes, dogma, certain moral principles to which you must adhere in order to be a member, and those things are fine. I mean, the Boy Scouts have that, the Masons have that, lots of people have that. They say if you're going to be one of us, these are the rules. You've got to think like us. You've got to be like us. And they can do that. I just don't want it tied to atheism, because that's not what atheism is. And I don't think it's good for them either. One perfect example was from one of Greta Christina's blog posts, where she said that, for example, you couldn't have black people in the same atheist movement with a person who would make the argument that the reason black people are more religious or seem to be more religious is that they don't have good critical thinking skills. I find that silly on its face, especially as one of my friends who happens to be a black man makes that case regularly. He grew up in inner city Detroit schools, very bad schools, and he basically said that he knew nothing about critical thinking until he got to college, and not even much then. It wasn't until he got out of college he began to study it more for himself and became a skeptic and learned to think critically. But the blame isn't on him for being black. It's nothing to do with his race or his genetic potential or anything like that. It's simply that many, many blacks in this country grow up in areas where the school systems are pretty lousy, and they're not taught good critical thinking skills. Matter of fact, most people in America aren't, but it's even worse there. So a case could be made that not only is this part of the problem with trying to get more blacks to come out as atheists, but there might be something we can actually do about it. We might be able to help them out, give them better critical thinking skills, and maybe help free some of them from this. But in the atheist plus world, you don't listen to those people. You don't get to hear what they say, because you've already decided that anyone who would talk that way has to be a racist. So I think that's a real problem for them. The other problem that I see is that we're a small and reviled minority as it is, and we have some very basic things we need to work on. Number one is being accepted as equal citizens. Number two is fighting for the separation of church and state here in America, and fighting for the rights of the non-religious all over the world. That's enough of a challenge for us. We don't need to be adding all this other stuff in there because somebody was offended in an elevator. And I do believe that that's a big part of where all this comes from. I know there are legitimate claims out there, people who have behaved inappropriately, and that should be dealt with. But to start a whole movement that is going to splinter the atheist movement is absolutely wrong. I don't like it. And I will also say that I think it's important that we all work together, because we do have something in common, and that's our atheism. Again, Greta Christina contends that you can't have misogynists and women, or minorities and racists, all in the same group. And I contend that she's absolutely wrong about that, because we're all atheists. I'm sure there are atheist misogynists and atheist racists out there, but that doesn't mean we can't work together on something that we agree on. I have many friends. I'm a fairly liberal guy, and one of my best friends is a Tea Party Republican. But we can work together on a lot of things. There are things we agree on, and I think his views are horrific, and he thinks my views, he thinks I'm a socialist commie pig. That's fine. We put that aside and work on what we want to work on. What you should be looking at is people's behavior, not what they think, not who they are. That's what religions do. What we should do is simply say, if you're going to be at our conference, or you're going to be interacting in a group with us, if you are a misogynist, you can't go around groping women, making inappropriate sexual comments, doing things like this. If a man walks into an elevator late at night with a woman, it's perfectly acceptable for him to think to himself, wow, she's hot, I can't wait, I want to get her back to my room, as long as he keeps his mouth shut and doesn't act on that. And that's the distinction they're not making here. See, if they knew that man was thinking that, they wouldn't want him in their group. They'd want him out. Because you can't have misogynists and women together. Even if they can come together and put aside their feelings, their attitudes, and work productively. And being as small a group as we already are, I think it's important that we include as many people as possible. And again, Greta makes point. She says Atheism Plus is about being more inclusive. But their way of getting to being more inclusive is ridiculous. In order to be, quote unquote, more inclusive, they want to weed out the people that they think might make other people uncomfortable. In other words, we'll exclude this group so that we can bring in this group that we like better. That's not being inclusive, it's just being selective in a different way. You're selecting for a different group of people, the ones that you think are the best, the ones that you think belong in your group. And that's a perfectly legitimate thing to do, but don't try to put it under the guise of inclusiveness. Just because there might be somebody out there who's offended by someone else's opinion and doesn't want to be in a group where somebody else is going to express that opinion, doesn't mean that you're more inclusive to exclude the people who had the quote-unquote offensive opinion. I only saw a couple videos on this, and I don't remember the person's name, but the woman that got all upset about the other woman wearing the I'm Not a Skeptic t-shirt and had to leave a conference early. I'm sorry, but if you exclude the person wearing that t-shirt for this other person who is so silly that she's going to be in tears and horribly offended and have to leave because of this, I think that's foolish. I want adults in any group that I'm a part of. I want people who can look at that and maybe even say, hey, I think you're wrong. I like the skeptic. I want to be a skeptic. And what makes you think that there's something wrong with that? But to burst into tears and have to leave, and then to say, well, we have to ban these people from the group so that this person will feel comfortable, and by doing that, we're now inclusive, is ridiculous. And that's what frightens me, that the speech that I'm hearing coming out of the Atheist Plus group sounds so much like the theists. It's so much like religion in the way they speak and how certain they are of their correctness and how they're certain in their hearts that certain people should be excluded and certain people are bad. They're just making themselves into another religion, just a religion without a God. But either way, I don't want to be associated with it, so I would ask them to remove the word atheism from their name. Become the Secular Social Justice Foundation or whatever you want to be, but don't call yourselves atheists. Atheism's got nothing to do with what you're doing. It's got nothing to do with any moral or social issue. Atheists come down all across the spectrum on these things. Stalin was an atheist. We can all admit that. So there's nothing about atheism that's tied to any of these things, and I don't want it tied to them. Atheism is enough of a burden on its own. Even though I proudly have called myself an atheist for 30 years, it ain't easy, and we don't need to make it harder by muddling up the waters with Atheism Plus. So call yourself something else. Work for your goals. Many of them sound very admirable, and that's fine, and you have a right to do it. Do what you want to do, but get the name atheist out of it, because I certainly do not want to be associated with that group. And that basically sums it up. Do what you like, don't call yourselves atheists.